Hedera?
No, could you change it?
I have to change the name afterwards.
Oh, can you do that?
Yeah, I'm editing afterwards. Hedera?
No, could you change it?
Being recorded. Okay, here we go. 17b2, bottom right hand corner. We were praising the opinion of Rabbi Shimon because we said what we've said. We said about Rabbi Shimon, one whose mother is giving birth to him should pray that it should give birth to someone like Rabbi Shimon. Right? Someone who's giving birth to a baby should pray that I should have a baby like Rabbi Shimon. And even though Rabbi Shimon, he refuted everything Rabbi Shimon said, but nonetheless, his line of reasoning was something that was commendable. And based on that, that was the praise for Rabbi Shimon. Okay, so based on that, we have the following question. We said the following logic, that based on one type of sacrifice, let's say, take for example, we were discussing Bikurim, the first fruits. And we wanted to know where in Jerusalem must the first fruits be eaten. So it must be eaten within the walls of Jerusalem. And we said, well, why do you need a verse for Bikurim, for example, if you can learn it out of Maser, out of the tithe? So you compare it to the tithe, and you say, just like the tithe, which is weaker, should be eaten in Yerushalayim, how much more so the Bikurim, which is stricter, should also be eaten in Yerushalayim. So Kal V'chomer, right? Using a Kal V'chomer, that's how we were arguing, or if Shimon was arguing, that we should be able to learn certain laws. And if we use a technique of Kal V'chomer, weak and strict, we then don't need the particular verses either, because we have the Kal V'chomer logic. And once you have the Kal V'chomer logic, you don't need a verse anymore, because you use your logic and you can come to the conclusions without specifying every type of sacrifice in the verse. That was the whole debate. And we then argued why you still do need a verse. That was the counter arguments to Reb Shimon. It's like, your logic sounds fantastic, but here's why you need a particular word for each type of sacrifice that the Torah was speaking about. But the question now is more of a principled question. But do we have a biblical prohibition based on the Kal V'chomer logic? Are you able to establish an avera, a transgression, based on the Kal V'chomer logic? That's the question. Now, if you notice, the terminology was warning. Are you allowed to warn? Are you allowed to establish based on the Kal V'chomer? Look at footnote 18. There is a general rule that no act is punishable biblically unless scripture contains an hazara, a warning. We discussed that, right? You need to have a warning in one verse, and then comes the punishment. There is a negative commandment against committing the act. Now, the basis for all of Reb Shimon's arguments in the Brisa is the premise that a prohibition derived through a Kal V'chomer is punishable by Malkus. That was how he established this. And this leads him to derive through the device of, if unnecessary in its context, it can be that, a new prohibition for each item listed. The Gemara, however, objects to the notion that a Kal V'chomer satisfies the requirements of a scriptural warning for any sort of penalty. Thus, all the items must be listed so that there will be an explicit prohibition against eating any of them outside Yerushalayim. And none of the references are unnecessary in its context. Can leave that terminology out. But the point is that we can't derive one for the other. Right? You can't derive one for the other. You've got to be, is that Safari? What are you using? It's a brilliant app. Safari, yeah. That's popping up lately. They're raising money for their website. Okay, so here comes the question. So can we establish a warning based on the Kal V'chomer? Top of the back into the Gemara, second last line. Even according to the opinion who holds that we do punish based on logic, so punishment you can derive. In other words, you don't know what to do with the guy. we know he's done wrong, but we don't know if it's Malchus, lashes, or if it's death, or what type of death. That, if you want to figure out what to do with him, that you can learn out of a Kavachomer. Okay? But even according to that opinion, Ein Mazhirin Minadin, this is quite a fundamental principle. We don't warn or establish a prohibition based on logic. Now, this, how do you know this, by the way? How does the Gemara know this? Tradition. Halacha Moshe Misinai. Just like, how do we know the Kavachomer? Kavachomer is one of those items in Rabbi Shmuel's Mishnah. Rabbi Shmuel says the Torah is derived through 13 attributes of, well, not attributes of mercy, but attributes or techniques of learning. 13 midos. 13 ways of learning the Torah, right? Kavachomer is one of them. So who gave that to us? Moshe Rabbeinu gave it to us. He told us, weak and heavy, weak and strict. You can learn one from the other. But the same Moshe Rabbeinu told us that you can't derive prohibitions from that technique. You can derive maybe detailed, you can derive punishment, but you can't derive the actual prohibition because of logic. You need to have scripture written clearly, explicitly before you establish a prohibition. So what was Rabbi Shimon thinking when he said Kavachomer? How then can Rabbi Shimon assert that the verse is not needed to teach these prohibitions? It can be derived logically, and therefore must come to teach different prohibitions. So the Gemara replies, Isura ba'alma. What he's learning out, interesting new category this is, it's a prohibition, but not an avera. So it's prohibited, but it's not one of the commandments of prohibition or negative commandments for which you will receive lashes. He's saying, no, it won't be lashes deserving. He's changing his mind because he spoke last time there'll be lashes for it. Now he's saying, no, you won't get lashes for it because it's not biblical. But then what is it? It's Isura ba'alma. Look at footnote 21. Maybe he can help us define what this means. The principle that a warning cannot be derived by the Kavachomer means only that no punishment can be administered on the basis of such a warning. But the Kavachomer is sufficient to show that the act is prohibited. That's when Shimon derives many of the prohibitions through the device of Kavachomer. He means that Kavachomer teaches that each of these acts is prohibited, and the explicit verse must in each case be coming to prohibit something else. Rabbi Shimon concedes, however, that Makkos is not incurred for violating any of these additional prohibitions.
What is?
Sounds
What's the consequence?
No consequence. In God's mind, you've done wrong.
Yeah, well, we said at a certain point, we said about death at the hands of heaven. It sounds like that kind of thing.
Right. So in other words, in God's books, you've transgressed.
Yeah, so okay, fine.
So when you get up to the gates after 120, they'll keep that on your record. But no Malchus will be punished here in your living life.
But if you know this is a prohibition, so the deduction of this is prohibition, isn't that a warning by itself? So if you transgress again the same transgression, haven't you been warned again? Shouldn't you be?
You mean your second time? In your second time.
Yeah. Let's say you
But we don't have. First of all, we don't know what the punishment is going to be. The default punishment of Torah is Makkos. That's the topic of our Gemara, lashes. When there's no punishment mentioned, you go to lashes. But what we're saying now is that the Kavachomer is not strong enough to create a prohibition with a punishment. That's not going to work. So it can create a prohibition, that's called Isura ba'alma. That's the terminology there. Just a prohibition. But to associate to it a Malchus, lashes, that's too strict. So it won't be considered a negative commandment. So what this establishes, in a way, we'll see how else I don't think we finished the conversation yet. What we're suggesting is that there's two types of prohibitions in the Torah. There's a type of prohibition as the typical, which is you're warned and then you're punished, either with lashes or death or excommunication or whatever the case may be. Right? That's one type of prohibition. And the second type of prohibition, like the one we're discussing now, which comes as a result of a derivative, learning of, there won't be any punishment associated.
Does this stand, or are they going to repeat
No,
it?
I have a feeling that the conversation is continuing.
It's
The
gonna-
the conversation is going to continue. I don't think we're done yet.
But then does it make it, to me, it then makes sense that you've got to just distinguish between the two, and you've got to state each one so that you know that it is a
That's
punishment.
absolutely it. You have to, even though in our minds we shouldn't differentiate. It's like rabbinical and biblical. So it's very important to establish what is rabbinical and what is biblical. Not because we're looking to belittle the rabbinical law. On the contrary, according to Torah, according to Talmudic oral tradition, rabbinic law is as important to us as Torah law is.
Yeah, what I was trying to get at is you were saying the default thing goes to lashes. But in order that you don't go to
Yes,
lashes,
you have to specify.
unexpectedly, you have to specify.
Exactly,
in order to know that
exactly.
it's not, yeah.
Right. So you have to explain that this is a different type of category.
So what constitutes a warning?
No, the mere fact that the Torah says it once, that's your warning. And then the next time there'll be the consequence to it. So what's when the Torah says something explicitly, that's your warning. And then Torah will mention it a second time in a different place with the context of a punishment. But here, and remember also, just can I to your point in a second? Just to Hilton's point. Hilton asks, is this still is this standing? Remember, Rabbi Shimon's arguments all fell away. We refuted Rabbi Shimon for other reasons. It's not relevant right now. How we refuted him. So in the case of the specific case he's talking about, Bikurim and others, it's sort of irrelevant, this discussion. It's like we're asking what was he thinking when he suggested it.
But
You're asking on the
he's
principle.
created a category.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, does that still exist in
Yes.
wider
Yes.
halacha?
Yes, exactly.
Because sometimes, someone comes up with something, and then as we saw, someone else, they have a whole discussion, and then eventually they refute his
Exactly.
arguments. And
Right. But the principle is what we're trying to establish. There's one thing I just heard recently from a teacher. There's one thing about knowing the content, and there's one thing about knowing the skill or the knowledge behind the content. So what's very important about Gemara learning and a lot of our discussions is I don't know how much of it we're going to remember the details of the debate. And the truth is there's room for that too. There are people who will spend time revising this page, 4 or 5 times until they actually get it because they want to know the details and they want to remember the details. But I think for us in our learning of Gemara, what really this is about is establishing an understanding of principles. What's a kal v'chomer? What's a warning in the Torah? What's Makkos? What's lashes? What's bikurim? What's meiser? That's what we're gaining by learning like this. Is that we're gaining a knowledge that's vast and principle based rather than detail based. So, for example, this is an interesting principle: the fact that you can't establish a law from a logical principle, a logical derivative of Moshe Rabbeinu. That's an interesting detail. That's an important detail. And to have a prohibition that you can't give punishments for, it's also interesting. You can have a category of prohibition that you don't get punished for. It's left to God to decide what to do. But by the way, there is something called, we're not discussing this now, but there's something called rabbinic lashes, which is different to biblical lashes. Biblical lashes is when one has transgressed biblical prohibition, the default punishment is going to be lashes by the Beth Din, and somewhere between 1 and 39, even though the terminology is 40, we don't go to 40, 1 to 39, it's a whole different discussion, is biblical lashes. There's something called rabbinic lashes, which they're allowed to do based on their discretion. That doesn't fly too well today. I gave you that example about the get, where they try to force a husband to give a get. So halacha says that if the best thing was to force the husband to give a get, they can beat him until he says okay. And that was tried in Borough Park a couple of years back, and this person, the Beth Din, received a summons as a result. So it doesn't fly too well in civil law, but that's rabbinic lashes, where the rabbis have the power, according to halacha, to act on Makkos because they want to bring discipline to the community. Right? They want to bring structure to the community.
Was it constellation that you give?
No, it's a simmer.
Yeah.
Simmer, yeah. So the lashes we give Erev and Kippur is
No, they're not.
and we don't give 39. We give it comes to 39. It's 13 times 3, right? So it's the same idea. Is that lashes was seen as a cleansing process. When you got punished, well, it's not punishment is not for the sake of punishment. Punishment is a part of a process of cleansing. So when you got lashes, right, then that cleansed you. So as we come into Yom Kippur, the tradition is give him lashes so that he'll have received his punishment, and then he can come into Yom Kippur free of sin. That's part of the tradition. Similar to mikveh, which is also part of a cleansing process. Similar to kaparas, which is also a cleansing process. Fasting, right. So all these different customs are related to the practice of coming into Yom Kippur, clean.
If I have positive commandments,
Yeah. You mean the missing out of positive commandments?
Yeah.
Right. The reward you'll get one day in Olam Haba. Please God. But the missing out of a positive commandment, for example, tefillin. If you don't put on tefillin one day, that's not a prohibition. It's you haven't fulfilled the positive commandment, which means you're lacking. Not to say you're not lacking, you're lacking. But it's not as if you've transgressed. There's no punishment to a mitzvah aseh, a positive commandment that hasn't been fulfilled. It hasn't been fulfilled. So there's no punishment. It's still wrong. That goes back to Evan's point. You've still done wrong. Up in heaven, they'll bring it on the spreadsheet. But there's no punishment associated to a mitzvah aseh that you haven't fulfilled.
They're gonna have a long one with me.
What? Yeah. If you didn't know.
So you don't know that.
No. So we definitely have a category called negligence, or not negligence, accidental. The question is if ignorance today is accidental. So there are people who are born totally ignorant. There's a concept of a child born into it's important in halacha. A child born into a secular home or irreligious home, right? Not traditional, irreligious home. Maybe the child is excusable until a certain age where he could be educated.
The father's punishment
for not educating his child.
Correct.
Okay, so that comes to
Barmy, you say it there.
After that,
so then you hand it over.
you're a man.
But the point is, come back to your point, is that there is a category of accidental, and therefore they won't be held against.
Yeah, but what if you don't go to shul on Shabbos, but you daven at home?
That's a whole new category.
You don't go to shul on Shabbos.
So I recently heard a classic comeback to that point, because that was the answer to those who wanted to remain at home after COVID. The rabbis encouraging davening at home, it came back to bite them after COVID, because then everybody said, well, I can daven at home, why can't I stay at home? Right. So I heard a classic comeback just recently about Schechter in New York. There's a few of them, so I'm not sure exactly where he is and why you had one of them, and I'm not sure, but of the modern Orthodox teachers of America today. And somebody said to him, Rabbi, I daven better at home, so I'd rather stay at home. And he came back with a very harsh comeback, and he said, what do you mean daven better at home? That's nonsense. First define what davening is, and then we can decide what's better and what's worse. So he was baffled. He said, if you're looking for yoga or meditation, I get you. You do yoga better at home, or you meditate better at home, I get you. But if davening means following the guidelines of what we've been taught of how to daven, well, then you haven't followed the guidelines. You're choosing your dining room over a minyan, over Baruch Hu, Baruch Shemo, over Amen, over Laning, over Kedusha. So what defines that as davening? Okay, so that was quite a harsh pushback.
When we had COVID.
Okay, that's why the rabbis have a problem. That's why the rabbis have a problem. They said it's okay during COVID, and now they're going to say it's not okay after COVID. It is. That's a powerful comeback. I haven't answered so harshly to. I have not answered so harshly and strictly to people.
Yes.
I actually like that response. I like that response that he gave. Like, what's davening?
It's true.
But I'll be more accommodating and more understanding. Okay, if you're going to daven at home. Okay, I respect that. But maybe my point, or the point of clarification is, it's okay to daven at home because many people daven at home. That's fine. But don't tell me it's better than shul. Never in history did anybody say that davening around the dining table, thank you, is better than shul. They people have accepted that because of work responsibilities or waking up late or waking up early or I'm in a rush. Okay, I got to daven at home. That's fine. But to start selling the story that it's a better meditative process.
Okay, here's another one.
You looked at it in the same way as like being late for davening, where you where you catch up and you're allowed to miss out pieces. Yeah, okay, you can if you do, but it's not the
Secondary.
Yeah.
Would you rather have us in shul or let us stay home and daven because we'd rather?
That was what?
There was an elderly lady in KwaZulu-Natal, who lived too far away from the shore to walk. And she said to the rabbi, what is better? Do I get driven to shore? Or do I stay at home and pray myself on a Shabbos? And there was a whole debate about it.
And what was the
The wording is interesting because she's obviously not wanting to daven, not wanting to drive herself.
No, she was too old to drive herself.
Oh.
Therefore, too old to walk the distance.
I understand. So she was saying,
She lived a kilometer away. She lived 5 or 6.
yeah, but the reason why I'm pointing that out is because she would not have driven anywhere else on Shabbos.
No. And she wasn't prepared to drive herself.
Yeah.
Somebody else would drive.
Yeah. That's very interesting.
And the answer was, she was to stay home. Yeah.
That's because Matthew, she's sensitive to the fact that she's going to stay home the whole Shabbos. That's the question. That clarifies your question. If someone comes and says, Rabbi, I will stay home the entire Shabbos, right? If you tell me to, rather than driving out to shul, that's a big dilemma. But if someone's going to go out anyway for a coffee or visit the kids or the grandkids,
just coming to shul. They're just coming to shul.
It's a major question. I'm not sure the answer. I'm not convinced either way, to be honest. In other words, I don't think I would say.
Does the Chabad rabbis prefer you to come to shul?
It's complicated.
It is complicated.
The Chabad rabbis have to look at what the Rebbe said.
And what
And
is
he
the
was
rest?
sometimes quite strict.
Isn't
But you never have to eat.
So you can say there is a principle in halacha that says desecrate one Shabbos so that you can observe many more Shabbatot in the future.
Mm.
So if you're not involved in Jewish life, i.e. shul and the inspiration that shul comes with, what chance do you have to stay loyal and faithful to your standards? If you're at home every week without being engaged in Jewish life and learning and engaging and talking and all, are you going to stay as strong for the rest of your life? It's very tough. We see what happens. People on their own, they don't manage. They need the support system. Eventually it goes out the window. I can't manage this. So then I dump everything. I don't go to shul and I don't do anything else. So that's why it's a complicated question. Okay, let's go on. So we had left-hand column, Isura ba'alma. Okay, now we're going to challenge that. Rava says, everything went wrong here. You have a non-kohen who eats of the oil. The oil offering was the offering that goes up in its entirety. So he ate the wrong sacrifice because oil is supposed to be all burnt, but he ate it. Not only did he eat it, it wasn't a kohen. Who was it? A stranger. So it was a zar. And he ate it before sprinkling of the blood. So wrong timing. And he ate it outside of the chayma. Boy, oh boy, this guy transgressed. He transgressed everything. It's like the story. It's like the story of the Badicheva. You've heard this one before, where he walks past the shul and they're sitting outside shul on Yom Kippur is somebody with a cheeseburger and a cigarette in hand.
Yeah.
And he looks at this yid and he says, "You obviously don't know that it's Yom Kippur." And he says, "Sure, I know it's Yom Kippur. I obviously don't know you can't smoke Yom Kippur." "Yes, sure, I know I can smoke and I can't smoke and I'm smoking anyway." Eating, mixing meat and milk, everything. And the guy was so honest to say, "I know everything. I know it's Yom Kippur. I know you can't smoke. I know you can't eat." So he looks up to Hashem. He says, "Rebbeinu Shalom, Master of the universe, look at your people. On Yom Kippur, they're the most honest people of all." He tried to find merit in the honesty of the individual, but everything he was doing was wrong. Right? So now this is the category. So it says Reb Shimon. So Reb Shimon says loike chamesh. Yeah, 5 times lashes here. By the way, we say it's impossible to get. The reason why we don't give 40 is that number. We don't give 40 because nobody can manage 40. and out of Rachmanis, we give maximum 39. Now, this is a guy who now deserves 5 times 39. So he's never going to get the 5. It's like when you do these prison sentences.
Concurrence.
They run concurrently and run, I don't know, what's the longest sentence a person can get?
Yeah, oh, like 3 lifetimes.
3 lifetimes, 5 lifetimes. It doesn't make sense. But it just shows how harsh the punishment is. The Rebbe Shimon says you get 5 times Malkus penalties because you committed 5 transgressions. Number one, he summarizes them in English: eating outside Yerushalayim, eating before the blood was thrown on the altar, eating through it because he's a non-kohen, eating outside the temple courtyard, and eating ola meat, which nobody's supposed to touch. Now, as we saw in the Brayso, Shimon relies on the logic of the Kavah Chomer to derive that the first 4 of these prohibitions apply to the ola. Okay, he says over here. The same Rabbi Shimon said we have Kavah Chomer for every one of these, for the first 4 at least. The Yerushalayim, the blood, non-Kohen, and the courtyard. We have a Kavah Chomer for each one, and yet he says you get lashes for them. Now this contradicts what we just said. We just said that Reb Shimon, what's the word? Gave in. What terminology we use? He conceded. Yeah, he said there's something called a prohibition with no punishment associated. But here we see in the Ola category that each one had a Kavah Chomer because we discussed each one, and yet he says that you get punished by Malkus for each one. Didn't we establish that that's not going to be the case? Okay. So says the Gemara, Chamisha Isurin Habu. He meant to say not 5 times Malkus. Look at the Hebrew terminology before. Not Loike Chamesh, not that you get hit and 5 times, but rather it's 5 Isurin. Change the terminology. Not 5 times Malkus, but rather 5 times prohibitions. That's right, 5 different prohibitions. The actual article says here, I'm going to show you these from Rashi. He says, and the terminology of Malkus penalties is to describe the number of transgressions. But it wasn't really Malkus. It wasn't really lashes. It was Isurin Ba'alma. It was just regular prohibitions without the Malkus associated. Quite a difficult answer because he did say lashes. We're trying to clarify. It didn't mean lashes, it meant prohibitions, 5 prohibitions, but not related to any lashes. Therefore, he won't get any lashes for those categories because according to Reb Shimon's original logic, again, I don't know if Reb Shimon's claim still stands because we refuted a lot of Reb Shimon's logic. But in logic, in principle, that's what he meant. Okay? Okay, so now we continue with another question. But we learned in a Mishnah. We learned Elohein Haloikin. These are the ones who get lashes. This is actually our Mishnah on 13a. And we said on 13a, those who have books, the beginning of the chapter 3 of Makkos, these are the ones that get lashes. And part of that was the one we're dealing with now, Bikurim. Where did we say the Bikurim one? Resurrection. Hold on. Eating Bikurim before reciting the verses. Sorry. 17a was the last one we just learned. 17a was a continuation of that Mishnah. 17a was the opening line, right? Whoever eats Bikurim without reciting the verses, or eats the Kodesh Kadoshim, the holy sacrifices, outside the courtyard. That's the beginning of our Mishnah on 17a2. Or 17a, yeah. 17a too. Right. Okay. So let's get back into this. So we said these are the ones who receive lashes, including the Bikurim, including the Kodesh Kadoshim. Now here, Reb Shimon learnt all these out of Kal V'chomer, and yet they get lashes. The Mishnah says clearly, these are the ones that get lashes. So he's not defining a Isura Ba'alma, a regular transgression. Here he's saying these are the ones that, again, he's using the right, look at the terminology he's using. He's using terminology of Makkos. They're going to get lashes, but he's the one that told us that you can derive these things out of Kal V'chomer. So again, we're refuting that point, is that you see from here that when you do a Kal V'chomer, you can give lashes based on the Kal V'chomer, because that's what the Mishnah says. These are the ones you're going to give lashes to. The Bikurim, the sacrifices, eating them outside the right place, you'll give lashes. So then how does that get reconciled with the principle? You don't give lashes based on the Kal V'chomer. Now we've got a problem from our Mishnah. So over the page to 18, Chai, 18:1. And look at the Hebrew side of this page. Lucky you're not studying the Hebrew side, but you have a small piece of Gemara surrounded with tons of Tosfot, which is complicated text. It could take you weeks to learn through. In fact, it's actually a continuation. If you look at the previous page, 17b3, the Tosfot starts before then. It starts with the Surah Ba'alma, middle of the page, and then it goes all the way over to the next page. This could take weeks to learn.
Have you learned it?
Not that I haven't learned this one. And it's extremely technical.
And where's the translation?
No, there's no. Here.
Yes.
No, they don't offer translation of Tosfot.
Is it Hebrew or Arabic?
Aramaic.
No, but it's the
What's
point.
that?
is the-
There's now books, later books that have been written by contemporary scholars, learners, who have translated Tosfot with commentary for you, more for your Shiva students. Because you got Shiva students trying to learn through this, it could take them.
The first barrier is you have to learn
Language.
how to read that.
The Rashi,
Yeah, just to read the font.
Rashi, right.
So to understand this on the left, but we could say Rashi, okay, that's understand.
No, not that.
No,
Yeah,
no, you're right. I just want to know what that is.
No, so it's the outer
And then
page.
just, can I just ask
towards-
one?
Sure.
Sorry, again. You've got, is it cover? What's cover?
where do you see Chava?
On the right.
Oh no, Habach,
Oh, Habach.
Hagohos, Habach,
Oh, Habach. Hagois.
Hagohos, Habach. So you want to study this?
I just want to know what that is.
So I'll tell you now. Let's go around. Let's go around the time. Mesoras Hashas. We're studying the Gemara page.
No,
This is now Gemara Talmud 2.0.
Thank you. 2.0, not
2.0, okay? Yeah,
Yeah.
it is important. It was designed with, and it's remained. What's interesting is the design of the Gemara remained like this through the last 400 plus years, which means it's become tradition. 1600s. When was
Yeah,
it?
the
Vilna?
in Italy, something.
I think Vilna was the first Shas. 1600s. It's remained the same. It's remained the same. Okay, so Mesoras Hashas on the right hand side.
So is it always
Always inside of the page.
Yeah.
Always inside of the page is edits to the Gemara text. So when there's another version, there's another. No. Turn over the.
No, sorry, Shas. Can you see it?
No. Why are you on that
Oh,
side?
you said you 18A1. 18A1. 18A1.
Easier if you go like that. Yeah. All be on the same page. Let's all be on the same page. Exactly.
Sorry, Shas. Yeah.
No.
No,
The right side. The right side.
yeah, that's the same. It's
inside
The Mesoras Hashas. It's always the inside of the Gemara.
always inside.
Always the inside.
Yeah.
That is corrections to the Gemara text. So when there's another version somewhere else.
So there's tradition, it was
Tradi-
brought down, or whatever, or in
Well,
hand.
and they pointed out that the wording here is wrong.
Mm.
And we what they do is they don't edit the page because the text is holy, it's traditional. So they created Mesoras Hashas. It's like version 2. Version 2 means you want to keep version 1 because that's the original text, and then you have the correction on the right side. Yeah. Okay. Under that is Hagois Habach, where the Bach wrote in commentary. Again, the background to the Bach, I don't know offhand, but the Bach was a commentator he was privileged enough that they included his commentary along the right-hand side. Not all Gemaras have this. This is a newer layout. The older layout didn't have all these
And he
commentaries.
refers to Rashi.
He's referring to many of the
Of the Rashi, okay.
of the Rashis.
Okay.
I think it's all edits on Rashi. All edits on Rashi. Then he goes on the left-hand side. Ein mishpat ner mitzvah. Is the sources of halacha. So if you look inside, Mem Yud Yud is Maimonides, that's the Maimonides. And just after that, you've got the terminology, okay, not here, you don't have it. But often it says Shulchan Aruch, it says Shulchan Aruch there, and a reference to where you would find this in halachic text. Because remember, halacha came from this. So from Talmud, then came halacha. So if you want to go look it up in the terminology of law, you'll go and look in the halacha.
Shulchan
Aruch, yeah. Okay. Then you have the Likutei Rashi, which again, this is the modern edition. The Likutei Rashi is any Rashi in Shas elsewhere that will help us understand this Gemara. They indexed it, right? Again, I don't. This is contemporary. I don't know who did this, but anytime there's a Rashi that would help us clarify the passage, they quoted it here. So you can see in brackets at the end, the first one comes from Chulin Samaches, and the other one comes from Psochim Chav Dalet 24. So they found two Rashis elsewhere that could help you understand the text. Before that was written, you had no clue. You had to go, research. You had to go to the library and open up and try and find. Now someone's done this. Someone's done this for you.
Nice.
And then similarly, also making your life easier, Torah Or HaShalem is where they put every verse that's quoted in the Gemara of this page, they've quoted the verse.
From the Torah.
Yeah, from the Torah. So you don't have to go now open a Chumash.
And the next will be the app.
Exactly. No, for the app here. You'll scan the app on the page. We'll have the QR code right here.
If I really do this, that's the first thing here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's made learners' lives a little bit easier when you have the text.
And then the big block.
Okay, the big block is a Gemara in the middle.
Yeah.
The right-hand side inside is always Rashi. That's always the inside is Rashi, and the outside is always Tosfot, which is his grandson. Now, my teacher once taught me again. I don't know if this is really written anywhere. I think I've told you this before. You've always got 4 lines of Rashi and Tosfot's commentary before you start with the narrow lines. There's always 4 lines. That was the layout.
4 repetitions.
Before you start.
In order to learn, before you move on.
Good memory. He said if you want to know how many times you have to learn it in order to learn it, it's 4 times you got to learn it before you even know it. 4 times. Because if you don't learn it 4 times, then you just got, you're touching the tip of the iceberg. You haven't properly learned it. So 4 times is the 4 top lines on top, and then starts Chazara, then starts the repetition process.
So when I say time to Raymond Nurich from the Ariach Mill, he's babysitting on his own, changing napkins, he's doing everything.
He rushed off to it.
It's his first debut.
You know what he's got?
It's his first debut.
He's got a baby bottle and a whiskey. Just to calm him
Okay, so let's get back to this. So 18. But he should confuse the bottles and the cups. Okay. So now we're on 18A1. So now that's okay. So now let's just clarify this. We want to know why the Mishnah says these are the ones that get lashes. And Reb Shimon is the one that says, but they're derived through Kal V'chomer. That makes it complicated. So Ella Kra Yiserahu. Okay, we have an extra verse that tells me that certain things cannot be eaten outside of the wall of Yerushalayim. In other words, in addition to the Kal V'chomer of knowing that a bikurim, for example, can't be eaten outside the walls, there's an additional verse which is added on and teaches me that the lashes related. So in other words, what Reb Shimon will argue is you're right. The Kal V'chomer can never put lashes onto a prohibition. But if I have another verse for it, in addition to the Kal V'chomer, then I can learn the need for lashes.
Why does he need to call the chomer again with the verse?
Yes, I hear that. Let's see. Okay, right, very true. No, I'll tell you like this to answer your question. You can't say why do I need a kal v'chomer? Kal v'chomer is logic. That's like saying why do I need logic?
And maybe I phrased badly, but
You won't need to learn it for the kal v'chomer.
there's another verse that they.
Okay, but
It's part of the scholarship.
the question is, what was his whole argument? Let's see what this extra verse was. Michti. Let's see. It says Vehevesem Shama. So now, Russell, if you want to figure out what this verse is, you go to your left-hand side, Torah or Hashalem, because that's the first verse we're talking about. It's born in Devarim. Vehevesem Shama. Oile Seichem. Vezivchechem. Eis Masrei Seichem. So you're going to bring there to Yerushalayim the Olot, Zvachim, the Masrot, tithing. The Eis Trumas Yedchem and the Truma for the Kohanim. The Nidreichem and promises, the Nidvoiseichem and gifts, or Bechoresh and firstborn, Bekachem and Seichem. So you give me a second here. I want to see something from I want to see something here from the Gemora. Yeah, interesting. This is Deuteronomy.
Is it 12:6? Normally the minute.
This is Deuteronomy 12:6, right? Look at this. Go to page 17A4. So this is the Gemara we learned when we learned Rabbi Shimon, when we're discussing Rabbi Shimon's arguments. 17A4 footnote 23. Which, by the way, it's also on the index Torah or Hashalim there as well. So just look at the verse that he quotes there. This is the verse that the Mishnah was discussing and Rabbi Shimon was arguing about. It says, you may not eat in your outlying cities. This is the negative prohibition. You may not eat in the outlying cities outside of Yerushalayim, the maaser, your grain, wine, oil, the firstborn, your flock, your vow offerings, your donative offerings, your truma. Right? It's all mentioned there. What about truma refers here, by the way, to bikurim. That was a Gemara that we learned. Truma is a contribution. It means bikurim. Okay, that's the one verse that we relied on. That said you can't eat out of Yerushalayim these items, your promises, your vows, your contributions, your bikurim. That was original verse that we're debating. Now come to this verse, and now you see in the positive context, it's a different wording. Here it's verse 6, not verse 17 now. Right now. What we're coming to now, it's verse 6. What does it say? You should bring there to Yerushalayim your Ola offerings, your Shlamim offerings, your Maisa offerings, your Truma offerings. I'm reading the art scroll inside the text. Your Truma, right? Back into 18A1, back in the text. I'm reading the italics, which is the verse that we're quoting from. You should bring to Yerushalayim your Ola offerings, Shlamim, Maisa Sheni, that's the tithe, Truma, which is the Bikurim, contributions, vows, donative offerings, firstborn of the cattle and flock. And you should eat them all before Hashem. Okay? So the Torah is teaching me to eat these items in Yerushalayim. Now, to answer Evan's point, if this pasuk is only teaching me that there's a mitzvah, it's not just a negative commandment, don't eat them in Yerushalayim. That was verse 17. So don't eat them outside. That was verse 17. Don't eat them outside Yerushalayim. But how do I know that's a positive commandment? It's like Shabbos. There's a negative commandment of transgressing Shabbos, but there's also a positive commandment of keeping Shabbos. So same thing over here. We learned earlier the negative commandment, but now we've got the positive commandment. You shall eat these items in Yerushalayim, meaning when you do it, it's a mitzvah. If it was just a mitzvah, the Torah said, the Gemara says, Lichte brachamana. If it was just Lichte brachamana, verse 6 tells, now this verse here tells you the positive commandment. and elaborates on all the positive commandments, on all the items in verse 6. When it gets to the prohibition of verse 17, do you really have to repeat each category again? Rabbi Shimon is asking. You just told me in verse 6 the mitzvah. The mitzvah was eat these items in Yerushalayim. So I've already summarized what I'm talking about. So now when I get to verse 17, do I really have to elaborate on them again? I could have said, Lichtav Rachaman, and the Torah could have said, Lo suchal lo oichlam, you shall not eat them. Go back to verse 6, you'll see what I'm talking about. You shall not eat them outside Yerushalayim. That's what the verse could have done. This is all part of Rav Shimon's argument. Let's go on to the right-hand column. But why do I need the Torah to go back and tell me what each of these sacrifices are? I've already told you in verse 6, in the time of the positive commandments, right, what these items are and where you should eat them.
And that's also just in terms of like the positive language of Torah. We always say, about not
How
using...
concise it is.
It's highlighting the positive.
Yes,
it's giving you the whole
in the
story.
positive,
In the positive,
right.
it's giving you all the details. When we get
Right.
to the negative, it doesn't want to be explicit. It wants to keep things upbeat.
and short and quick, right? Straight to the point. So same over here. Why elaborate? So here comes the answer. The idea was to put a prohibition to each one of these items beyond the prohibition that's stated in the verse. Wow. Let's just see what that means. Thus, in the case of Bikurim, the extra prohibition forbids on pain of Makkos, eating them before reciting of the verses. And in this position, the Mishnah lists this violation among those that carry the penalty of Makkos. So basically what he's saying is like this. He's saying, you could have learned it out by Kal V'chomer. Yeah, you could have. You would have derived it out of Kal V'chomer. But the fact that the verse went ahead and A told you that there's a new prohibition, so it spelt it out. A told you there's a prohibition, and B spelt out the details of the prohibition, is to tell you that there's something additional to the prohibition. It's called Makkos. It's quite a complicated. So within the verse itself, you've actually got two parts to this. You've got the prohibition. You've got the prohibition that the Torah is telling you, don't eat them outside of the city. And then you've got the specification of each item that tell you that you will be lashed. Even though you think that there's a logic called Kal V'chomer, I'm now going to specify the word for you so that you should know that it's going to come with lashes. Now, Evan's asking the question, why is this necessary? Why do we need the Kal V'chomer stage? Once you have the verse, and once you specify the items, that tells me that there's a prohibition and there's lashes. We're going a roundabout way. We're saying the prohibition I know because I have the Kal V'chomer and the logic. And the lashes I know because Torah specified. Why do we need both? I don't know the answer. And it's too technical to try and figure this out, to be honest.
Says here, the prohibition is derived not by means of an fortiori. Never heard of that.
Fortiori is the Kal V'chomer. Go on.
Rather, it is derived from the superfluous verse.
Yes. So he's now changing his mind.
Rabbi Shimon derives by means of a fortoria inferences of the additional problem that is in effect in each of these cases.
So now the question is, can I borrow that text for a second? Because maybe
Read the notes, 4 and 5, quite helpful.
the prohibition is derived not by means of this inference. Rather, it is derived by the superfluous verse. The Rabbi Shimon derives by means of the inferences Additional prohibition that is in effect in each of these cases. Okay, it seems like Reb Shimon is adding on 2 prohibitions to each category. Thank you. It seems like Reb Shimon is adding on 2 prohibitions to each category. Prohibition number 1 you would have got from the Kal V'chomer. Prohibition number 2, or other way around. Prohibition number 1 would come from the Torah, specifying each item for which you get lashes. And prohibition number 2 is Reb Shimon adding on an additional prohibition through the logic of the Kal V'chomer. It is complicated because we would have to go back to Reb Shimon and see if that fits in. Is that really what he was saying? Is that really, I mean, you got to go back 2 pages, 3 pages and figure out now, does that fit into his arguments? Because very nice that you want to suggest what he's saying. But let's now go back to the text that we just learned a few weeks ago and try and figure out if that's actually what he's saying. Does it fit in nicely? But we're not going to do that now. Sorry.
End of the day.
Why do we need an additional provision? Is that the question?
No. Why? I'll tell you why. For the same reason you can have a prohibition without lashes. Because in God's mind, he wants you to transgress a prohibition without getting punished. Not wants to. He's telling you you could transgress without getting punished. So to here, he decides you're transgressing 2 mitzvahs. That's right, that's his decision. So when you go upstairs, in the column of how many sins did you transgress with that action, it will say 2 rather than 1. That's God's decision.
So no one on earth can actually decide whether this prohibition is
Deserving of lashes or not?
Yes.
Well, if it's clear that a prohibition is deserving of lashes, then a Beth Din can take a ruling into their own hands. It's not our Beth Din, but a Beth Din during the times of the temple can take a ruling in their own hands. That's if it's clear out of the text that it's deserving of lashes. But if it's not deserving of lashes or you're not sure, then you got a problem. Then you leave it up to God to decide. Yeah. I'm not going to go on to the next case, but I see here that we're going to go on to that question of the person who ate and transgressed 5 times and deserves 5 times lashes. We only mentioned that by the by. We didn't really intend. This is a typical Talmudic discussion. We didn't intend to elaborate on that case. We only brought that case because we wanted to show how Rabbi Shimon says that you get lashes, even though he learns it out of a Kal V'chomer. That's why we brought it, right? But now the Gemara says, as you can see, it starts with the word gufa. Gufa means the body, or in Hebrew it's guf. In Aramaic it's gufa. And when you want to go back to the text of discussion, you say gufa. Let me just return to what we said in the body, and let's just analyze that for a second. So next week's Gemara starts with gufa. It quotes this statement of Rava that says that the guy who ate transgresses 5 times and deserves 5 times lashes. And then the Gemara is going to elaborate on this point, unrelated to our previous Gemara. So it's going to be a fresh start from next week, and we'll wait for them to unpack it. Okay. Are you busy reading the footnotes?
It's
When we go through, it's no wonder we can't